A little bit of brain fog going on, and so may not be our usual Sunday school this morning, but we're gonna work our way through it. Brother Croft sent me a message, said he was going to Seth Bunch's this morning, so he's not going to be here. He said he's conducting a hearing test down there. I don't know exactly what that means, except, Brother Croft can't hear, and maybe he thinks he can hear better at Seth Bunch's than he can here. But anyway, he said he's conducting a hearing test this morning. So anyway, pray for Brother Croft. See Miss Jimmy's not here this morning, so pray for her. And anyway, if you have your Bible, turn to Genesis chapter number 45. Genesis chapter 45. We will pick up where we left off last week. And I'll start reading in verse number 7, just to kind of refresh our memory where we were last week. And God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you that sent me hither, but God. And he hath made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. So again, here we have Joseph in chapter 45. Joseph is revealing himself to his brethren. At the end of chapter 44, Judah had given his presentation to Joseph, his plea to Joseph, so that because Joseph wanted to keep Benjamin and send the rest of them away, and Judah had given his plea, and it was such a moving statement to Joseph that he could not refrain himself any longer. Which is how chapter 45 starts out. And so Joseph sends out everyone in all the Egyptians out, and only his brothers are in there with him, and he tells them, he said, I am Joseph. And no doubt, and we're going to see that throughout the rest of this chapter, the range of emotions that they must have been going through. Every person in this chapter, the range of emotions they're going through, whether it's fear, is it excitement, is it gladness, is it there's just so many ranges of emotion that is going on in their minds. And we talked about last week how that when Joseph revealed himself to them, that they were scared. They were afraid. They did not know, they really didn't know what to say. Because, they said before, previously in one of their previous meetings with Joseph, how that they were very guilty concerning their brother. And so then we also looked in Genesis chapter number 50 last week, where even after Joseph has had them in Egypt for 17 years and nourished them for 17 years, whenever Jacob dies, the first thing they do is send a messenger down to Joseph, and they come down to Joseph and said, hey, you remember that whenever Dad was alive, you promised, and Joseph's like, guys, like, look, I mean, come on. Do you not even know who I am? Do you not even know? If you look right here, let me see if I can find it right here. And when Joseph's brethren saw that their father was dead, they said, Joseph will peradventure hate us, and will certainly requite us all the evil which we did unto him. And they sent a messenger unto Joseph, saying, thy father did command before he died, saying, so shall ye say unto Joseph, forgive, I pray thee now, the trespass of thy brethren, and their sin, for they did unto thee evil. And now we pray thee, forgive the trespass of thy servants, of the God of thy father. And Joseph wept when they spake unto him. And so it broke Joseph's heart to hear this. It broke his heart after 17 years of him taking care of them, for them to still think that was who he was. Joseph's brothers never did figure out who Joseph was. They never did understand who he was. And so he tells them, he said in 18, it says, and his brethren also went and fell down before his face, and they said, behold, we be thy servants. And Joseph said unto them, fear not, for am I in the place of God? But as for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive. Now therefore fear ye not. I will nourish you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spake kindly unto them. And so his at least 10 brothers I don't know about Benjamin, but I know at least his 10 brothers lived basically for 40 years of their life, at least 40 years of their life in fear. The 20 years before since they'd sold Joseph into slavery, and then the 17 years after, the 21 plus years, and then the 17 years after, so almost 40 years that they lived in fear, thinking that one day Joseph was going to reward them. He was going to reward them evil for the evil that they did. But they didn't understand that Joseph understood that God had a plan in all that. And so, it's very interesting in our lives whenever things happen to us, and that's what we talked about last week. Do we just take just a moment? That's what we talked about last week. Do you take just a moment and slow down and say, God, what are you doing in this moment? God, what are you doing to me in this moment? God, what are you wanting me to see in this moment? And so, we have here in verse number 9, Joseph tells his brethren, haste ye and go up to my father and say unto him, thus saith thy son Joseph, God hath made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down unto me, tarry not. Now, I'm going to say right here, do you think, this should be a wonderful reunion. It should be a great reunion. But because those boys had done what they had done, it's not going to be a good thing. Brother Wayne, think about it. Think about it. If you're, you know how it is. If your child has lied to you, and then later they have to come back and say, Dad, you remember when I said the yellow paint on the fender of the car was because I was parked in a parking lot and someone with a yellow car must have run into it? Well, actually, that was me in the McDonald's drive-thru when I cut a little bit too close, and I was great. You know what I mean? I mean, people make up stories all the time to cover for their transgressions, and a lot of times, and I've tried to teach my kids this. It's easier just to say, "Hey, I did it." And just take the punishment than to say you didn't do it and then find out later that you did do it. But again, what they did to Joseph, how were they going to go back to Jacob and say, "Hey, Dad, we had a lapse in judgment today, and while we had our lapse in judgment, we decided to sell our brother into slavery." So they made up the story. They brought the coat of many collars and said, "Hey, is this your son's coat?" And he mourned, and we read that passage where he would not be comforted. He would not be comforted. And so now they're going to have to clean this up. For 21 years, they've made their father believe that Joseph was torn by an evil beast. They've made their father believe that he was torn by a beast and he was dead. And now they're going to have to go back and they're going to have to clean this up. And again, I don't know. People make the statement all the time. If I'm going to eat crow, I'm going to eat it while it's hot. I don't know whether I'm going to like crow when it's hot or it's cold. I don't know that I want to eat it at all. Just to be honest with you, but you understand. These boys for 20 plus years, they've 10 of them have lived a lie. For 20 plus years, 10 of them have carried on like we're just our poor brother Joseph. Our poor brother Joseph. Just can't believe what happened to our poor brother Joseph. And they watched their father mourn and mourn and mourn and mourn and refuse to be comforted and mourn and mourn and mourn and would not be comforted. And not one time in those 21 years did one of them go over and say, Dad, can I tell you what happened? Can I tell you really what happened? Can I just tell you that we were having a bad day that day? It was hot out there. You know how it is when it's hot. Sometimes it's hot and you're working and there are question askers. I don't know if y'all work with question askers or not, and I don't mind people asking questions, but sometimes there's an appropriate time to ask a question, and there's not an appropriate time. And if you're like upside down in a vehicle, with a wrench and a cheater pipe on something, and one leg sticking out, and they're like, so what's this over here? I don't know what's that over there. I can't even see what's over there right now, or they're not paying attention. And so here they are, and they're going to have to explain to their father. They're going to have to explain to their father that well, it was just this. We were just having a bad day, and every time you sent him down there, he already told on us one time, and we weren't where we were supposed to be. And so now we knew we were going to get in trouble again because he was going to tell on us, and we just didn't want to get in trouble with you that day. So what we did, we made matters so much worse because we sold him into slavery. And I don't think, again, sometimes you tell the truth, you just don't tell all the truth. I doubt they told him. I doubt they were going to say, well, actually, 8 of the 10 of us voted to kill him, and Reuben wanted to save him, and Judah was good with selling him into slavery. And so I doubt the 8 of them said, well, actually, we really would have we would have preferred that he would have been dead. But they're going to have to have this conversation. They're going to have to have this conversation with their father. And so as soon as Joseph says, I am Joseph, there's 10 boys that are like, oh, we're in trouble now. We are in trouble now. We have messed up, and we have gotten caught. And it's one thing to mess up, and it's one thing to mess up, and then you realize you mess up, and you repent, and you get right. But it's another thing for you to mess up, and you not get right, and then you get caught. And so that's what these boys did. They may have in their minds tried to get right, and surely, based off of what they said, they felt bad about what they did, but they never could make it right with their father. Because if they ever did go back and say, hey, Joseph was alive, he wasn't dead, that we didn't actually do that, Jacob would have went looking for him. And so he tells them, he said, y'all, I want you to go get my father, and I want you to bring him down to Egypt. In verse number 10, he says, and thou shalt dwell in the land of Goshen. Now, what's going to happen here, and we're going to see as Pharaoh is going to offer them the land as well. And so here's Joseph, and Joseph has just not, he is just not, as he was collecting all the corn and everything for Egypt, he wasn't just collecting the corn from Egypt. If you remember from, I believe, chapter number 47, let me just take a look right here. In chapter 47, verse number, let's look at verse 17. And they brought their cattle unto Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for horses, and for the flocks, and for the cattle of the herds, and for the asses, and he fed them with bread for all their cattle that year. When that year was ended, they came unto him the second year, and said unto him, we will not hide it from my Lord, how that our money is spent. My Lord also hath our herds of cattle. There is not aught left in the sight of my Lord, but our bodies and our lands. Wherefore shall we dwell before thine eyes, before both we and our land, wherefore shall we die before thine eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for bread, and we and our land will be servants unto Pharaoh, and give us seed that we may live and not die, that the land be not desolate. And Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. For the Egyptians sold every man his field, because the famine prevailed over them, so the land became Pharaoh's. And as for the people, he removed them to cities from one end of the borders of Egypt, even to the other end thereof. Only the land of the priests bought he not, for the priests had a portion assigned them of Pharaoh, and did eat the portion which Pharaoh gave them, wherefore they sold not their lands. Now that is the same time frame that we're reading right here when Joseph's brothers are here, because Joseph's brothers, he tells them there's 5 more years of famine. And so Joseph buys all the land, he buys all the land of Egypt. And as he's buying all the land of Egypt, he has in mind, as he's buying the land of Egypt, he says, I have a place for my father and my father's family to live, and it is a place that is going to be separate. Even though it's in Egypt, it's still close to the land of Canaan, but it's separated so that the Egyptians and the Hebrews are not going to mix. They're not going to mix, and then God is going to be able to make a nation out of the children of Israel while they are in the land of Egypt, because of Joseph and all the things that Joseph had working behind the scenes as he was second in command, or as the boys called him, the Lord of the land. And so Joseph says, hey, I already have this place for you. I have the land of Goshen. And the land of Goshen has now been vacated because he's taken those people that lived in that land and moved them off into a city. And those people willingly did it and sold themselves. It's one thing if you come and take somebody's land and say, hey, I'm moving my family in here and y'all are moving out. But they sold themselves to save their lives. And because of that, they were willing to do it. And it appears for a very long time, there was no resentment between the Egyptians and the Israelites for a very long time. But yet here Joseph says, hey, I've got this land for you, and you're going to be near unto me, thou and thy children and thy children's children and thy flocks and thy herds and all that thou hast, and there I will nourish thee. He said, look, boys, I mean, we can keep doing what we're doing, but that's not God's plan. And we can keep doing what we're doing, and y'all can go back to the land of Canaan and then come back, but that's not God's plan. God's plan. I didn't write the passage down right now, so I'm not going to be able to find it right quick. But God even told Abraham that they were going to go to Egypt and spend 400 years in Egypt. And so God had a plan all the time that the children of Israel were going to go and sojourn, if you want to call it, but they were going to live in Egypt for 400 years. And so here is that time. And Joseph says, I'm going to nourish you. He said, for yet there are 5 years of famine. And so he said, there's 5 more years of famine. So you're going to have to just keep coming back. You can't haul enough food. You can't haul enough food back to Canaan to survive 5 more years to feed you and all your family. So the best thing for you to do is just come down here and let me nourish you. Let me supply you, while you're down here, instead of have to make a 400-mile journey back and forth. He said, lest thou and thy household and all that thou hast come to poverty. In verse number 12, he said, behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin, that is my mouth that speaketh it unto you. He said, y'all know who I am. Again, they didn't realize who he was as far as Joseph, but they understood who he was as far as the Lord of the land. And they understood the power he had. They understood the control he had. They understood that who he was in Egypt. And so they when he said, it's my mouth that's speaking it, and you can trust it, that he was not deceiving them here. He messed with them whenever he put their money in the sack's mouth, and he messed with them whenever he put his cup in Benjamin's sack. But he's not messing with them here. In verse number 13, he said, and ye shall tell my father of all my glory in Egypt. And I imagine Joseph had in mind, here it is, his father's thought he's been dead for 21 years or so. And Joseph had in mind, he pictured his father. And you know how it is. Sometimes if you haven't seen someone in a long time, you have a picture in your mind of what they look like. You haven't seen someone for a long time, and they've aged, and so your picture kind of changes. But if you see someone you went to high school with, sometimes you still have the memory of them from high school or whatever, and you're like, whoa, well. All right then. But here's Joseph, and he's thinking about his father, and he's thinking about him as a 17-year-old boy, the last time that he saw his father, and now he said, I want you to go tell my father, and I want you to tell my father of all the glory that I have in Egypt. I want you to go tell my father that, hey, that man that we were so scared of, that man that was the Lord of the land, that man that was so kind to us, but yet we were so fearful of him because, he put us in prison and he kept Simeon in prison and all that. I want you to go tell him. I want you to just go. I just want you to tell him. And you imagine every son. Every son wants their dad to be proud of them. It's just it's just part of the deal. You just want your dad to be like, good job, done all right. And honestly, I probably do a bad job of it because I'm not super emotional and I'm not super complimentary to my boys, and I should be better at it. And so, but every son just wants their dad just to say, good job, good job, good job. And my problem is I'll say good job, but then I'll add the but. We drove in the other day, and I'll bring up an instance, and you'll understand what my boys deal with here. And so, Frankie, I drove in the other day, and Bub washed his truck, and we drove in the parking lot here. As soon as we drove in the parking lot, he washed his truck, and there was one little dusty spot right on his driver's side, or his passenger's side door. I'm like, what in the world? What in the world? He washed his truck, and he missed one spot. And I taught him better. I taught him how to wash his vehicle better. And so if he would have said, hey, Dad, I washed my truck, I'd been like, yeah, but you missed that spot right there. And that's just how I am. It's just how I am. And I wish I wasn't that way, but it's just how I am, Paul. And so maybe it makes him a better person. It probably frustrates him a lot because he's like, man, I just want my dad just to be proud of me. Instead of being proud of me, he's like, yeah, you look right there. You still can't live up to my expectations. And so, but it's not that. It's just who I am. And so here's Joseph, and he's like, I want you to go, and I want you to tell my father of all my glory. And I want you to tell him all that you've seen, everything that you've seen, everything that's going on down here in Egypt. And I want you to tell him, you don't have to make anything up. You don't have to sugarcoat anything, but I just want you to make sure my father understands that I am Joseph, and I am in charge of Egypt. He said, and ye shall haste and bring down my father hither. He said, boys, he's 130 years old. I don't know how much time he has left. We're not playing games here. I want you to get back to the land of Canaan, get my father, and get him back down here, and then I can take care of you. And he says in verse 14, he says, and he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept upon his neck. Now you think about this. I mean, Benjamin was a little bitty boy whenever Joseph was sold into slavery. He was super young. And then in verse 15, moreover, he kissed all his brethren and wept upon them. And after that, his brethren talked with him. Now, like I said earlier, I read in Genesis chapter 50, and it's one thing to say you're sorry. It's one thing to say you're sorry. It's one thing to say I forgive you, but it's another thing to rebuild that relationship. And so that was the problem that Joseph's brothers had, that Joseph did not have. Again, like I said, for Joseph, it was over. For Joseph, it was over. What happened when they sold him into slavery? It was over. But for those boys, they couldn't get it into their mind that it was over. And so you find that, and we talked about it some last week, but you find that, I talk about how that happens in a marriage. It happens in friendships. Someone does something, and the other person gets offended, and they may rightly be offended, and the person says, I'm sorry, and then it should be over, but then there's always just that little thing there. It's that little thing there. It's because people don't know how to let things go. It's because people don't know how to just let it go and say, you know what, it is over. It's done for. We're not going to talk about it anymore, and it's just over. And so Joseph's brothers at this point should have been able to breathe a sigh of relief. They should have been able to breathe a sigh of relief and say, you know what, we're good. We're good. Joseph's in charge, and he's second in command in Egypt, and we're going to come down here, and he's given us a whole land of Goshen to feed our flocks and our herds, and we're going to be good. And so in verse number 16, it says, and the fame thereof was heard in Pharaoh's house. So now if you remember from the beginning of the chapter that Joseph sends them all out, and he sends them all out, but yet he wept. In verse number 2 it says, and he wept aloud, and the Egyptians in the house of Pharaoh heard. So they heard him weeping. So you can imagine they're almost like with their ears up to the door or whatever now, like what in the world is going on down there? And then they realize that these boys are Joseph's brothers. And it says, the fame thereof was heard in Joseph's house, saying, Joseph's brethren are come, and it pleased Pharaoh well and his servants. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, say unto thy brethren, this do ye, lade your beast, and go get you unto the land of Canaan, and take your father and your households, and come unto me, and I will give you the good of the land of Egypt, and ye shall eat of the fat of the land. Sorry. Now thou art commanded, this do ye, take your wagons out of the land of Egypt for your little ones, and for your wives, and bring your father and come. And regard not your stuff, for the good of the land of all Egypt is yours. And so now here is Pharaoh, and Pharaoh has heard that it's Joseph's brothers. And Pharaoh hears that Joseph's father is still alive. And Pharaoh understands, Pharaoh has established a good enough relationship with Joseph that he understands how important that family was. Joseph says he became a father to Pharaoh. Pharaoh did not try to become a father to Joseph. And so here he hears of Joseph's brethren, and he hears that his father's still alive, and he hears the plan that Joseph has. And as Pharaoh, he could have said, no, I'm not. No, they're not. They're not Egyptians. You're not given in the land of Goshen. But instead of that, this Pharaoh, who was a good Pharaoh, goes along with the plan of God and goes really above and beyond. Because he said everything that Joseph said is true, and he said, don't even bring your stuff. You don't even have to bring your stuff. You can leave your stuff, and I got better stuff for you down here than what you had over there, and you can have my stuff. And so here is God working it out for the children of Israel. And now you think about this, and we're going to see it when we get to chapter number 46, as Jacob begins to take his journey, and he gets to Beersheba, and him and God have a conversation. But you're going to see it, and you have to think about the seriousness of this move. This is a serious move. Obviously, there was a famine in land, but we know a lot of times when there was, famine in land, people did things they shouldn't have done. You think about Naomi. She said she went out full and come home empty because they decided to sojourn. They decided to go sojourn in a land whenever there was a famine in land. So you have to be careful. But when it's God's plan and God's design, then you just have to do what God wants you to do. And so here is Pharaoh, and Pharaoh said, I want you to load, I'm going to load y'all up with wagons. I'm going to load y'all up with wagons. You're not just going to have to put it on donkeys or camels or whatever y'all were planning on moving your stuff with. I've got wagons here in Egypt. and I've got wagons, and we're gonna fill them up. You're going to see how Joseph's going to provide. He's going to provide for his father on the way, and it's going to be very important. It's going to be very important. But here he's going to fill those wagons up. He said that way. He said your wives and your children. He's going to make. They're going to ride first class. They're going to ride first class. I've never rode first class in an airplane. I always end up back in coach. But they're going to ride first class in Egypt. They're going to ride in wagons. And so in verse number 21, and the children of Israel did so. And Joseph gave them wagons according to the commandment of Pharaoh, and gave them provision for the way. To all of them he gave each man changes of raiment. But to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of raiment. And to his father he sent after this manner: 10 asses laden with the good things of Egypt, 10 she-asses laden with corn and bread and meat for his father by the way. So he sent his brethren away, and they departed, and he said unto them, see that ye fall not out by the way. Now, again, like I said, sometimes when you're in the moment, the moment is okay. You're like, okay, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. But it's like if you're proposing to you want to propose to your wife, and you're like, hey, I have to ask permission from her father, and you'll kind of work the nerve up, and then if you have too much time between when you work your nerve up and when you see your father, you kind of start losing that nerve. And so if you think about it here, they've got this long journey back from Egypt to Canaan, and they've got to come up with a story. They got 10 brothers. They got to come up with, like, what in the world are we going to say to our dad? What in the world are we going to say to our dad? What are we going to say to our dad? I mean, we got options here. We got all these wagons. We got all this food. We can just come back and say, well, this is what we got. But how are we going to tell our dad that Joseph's still alive? How are we going to tell our dad that Joseph's still alive and not have to tell him that we're the ones that did it? And so Joseph says, look, boys, I just got one request. See that you fall not out by the way. And in verse 25 it says, they went up out of Egypt and came into the land of Canaan unto Jacob the father, and told him, saying, Joseph is yet alive. So they said, we're just going to go straight into it. We're just going to go straight into it. We're just going to go, hey, Dad, you ain't going to believe it. We were down there, and we're looking out. We're just standing around, and would you believe it? Joseph is still alive. I said, Joseph is yet alive, and he is governor over all the land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart fainted, for he believed them not. It's funny how people will easily believe a lie, but sometimes it's hard to get them to believe the truth. Jacob easily believed when they brought that coat of many colors and said, hey, is this your boys? He mourned, would not be comforted. Now they come back and they're telling the truth this time. Joseph's alive and he's the Lord of all the land of Egypt. And he's like, I don't believe you. Said his heart fainted. For he believed them not. And they told him all the words of Joseph, which he had said unto them. And when he saw the wagons, which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob their father revived. So all the words, they're like, no, Dad, I'm telling you the truth. Dad, I'm telling you the truth. And then about that time, here come wagon number 1. It's like, what in the world is that thing? Wagon number 2. Wagon number 3. And Gilly said when he saw the wagons, his heart revived. And Israel said, it is enough. Here again, what I was talking about in this chapter, the emotion of this chapter, the emotion of those boys of reuniting with Joseph, and then the emotion, the emotion of those boys as they had to stand before Pharaoh and be excited for what Pharaoh offered them, and the emotion of those boys as they made that long journey back from Egypt to Canaan land, and so. Mileage-wise, not a terrible amount, but still a long journey if you're going by foot or camel or donkey or whatever. But understand, and so now here the emotion of having to tell their father that Joseph is still alive, and tell their father that they lied to him. And now here's the emotion of Jacob. Jacob is a man who's 130 years old, and he's just looking for a place to die, just to be honest with you. He's just looking for a place to die. And now here he is, and they come up, and they show up, and they say, hey, Joseph is alive, and he's Lord of the land of Egypt. And Israel said, it is enough. He said, the one thing I thought that I could not ever see again was my boy Joseph. The one thing that I had in my mind that was gone, and I never even prayed for it again. Again, if you think your child's dead, what's the point of praying? Like David said, I can go to him. He can't come to me. But here's Jacob. He's like, I didn't even pray for it. I mourned and mourned and mourned. And it's funny because we're going to see it in the next couple of verses, how God kept Jacob in the dark this whole time. This whole time, Jacob was in the dark. It never even crossed Jacob's mind, as far as we know, that Joseph was alive. And so here he was in the dark for these 20 plus years, in the dark, that Joseph was alive, and Joseph was doing well, and Joseph was prospering, and Joseph was becoming a man on his own, and Joseph was becoming a man of God on his own, and Joseph was continuing the heritage of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then Joseph. And so here we have all that, and he says, Israel said, it is enough. Joseph, my son, is alive. I will go down and see him before I die. He said, I don't know how much time I got left, but put me up in one of them wagons, boys. Just circle the wagon. We'll leave our stuff here. That's what Mr. Pharaoh said to do. Just circle the wagons. They were headed in this direction, and just do a 180, and we'll climb up in the wagons, and we're headed in the opposite direction. I want to see my boy Joseph before I die. And so we're going to I'm going to stop there this morning. I know I'm a little early, but my voice is about shot. But in chapter number 46, at the beginning of the chapter, you're going to see how Jacob goes to a place. It's a place that Abraham has been to. It's a place that Isaac's been to. And now Jacob's going to go to and spend a little time with God and talk to God about it before he makes his way down into the land of Egypt. Thank y'all.